Now, we all have a few moments in life where we remember exactly where we were when it happened. Good or bad, we're never going to forget that moment in time. Now, for me, I remember exactly where I was when I first learned that Disney had bought Star Wars and was going to make new movies. We were in line, I was in the line with the group from here, from DR, Ryan was there, and we were in line for a free screening of Flight at Gallagher Theater just down the hall. And, well, as soon as I read the news, my excitement for Denzel was immediately eclipsed by my excitement for more Star Wars as I read more about it on my phone. Now, I know not everyone here has that same love for Star Wars. Honestly, only Bernardo's the one who came prepared. So for all I know, none of you have seen the movies, and I know some of you never have. I know that is shocking. Seriously, how have you never seen Star Wars? The only people who haven't seen it are the ones in Star Wars. But I know that there are some of us here who have not seen the movies. But there's also going to be a lot of us who grew up watching the movies and who love them so much. Now, I have no memory of the first time that I watched Star Wars, but I know I must have, because all my childhood, I knew that any stick could become a lightsaber. I knew that I could reach out and I could pretend to use the mystical force that gives Jedi great powers. I don't remember watching any of the classic Star Wars movies as a child. I just knew Star Wars. Now, I do remember going to go see the prequel trilogy, starting with The Phantom Menace, which came out when I was 8 years old. Now, most Star Wars fans dislike, to say the least, dislike the prequel movies. They're pretty goofy, and yet somehow trade tariffs are a much bigger part of the plot than you would have ever expected. They tell the backstory of the fearsome Darth Vader, but they make him to be a whiny kid. Didn't matter. I was young, and I loved it. I even loved Jar Jar Binks. I was 8. Forgive me for that one, Dave. Now, though, I'm even more excited, because I get to see these new movies. I get to go see them with Megan, which is a pretty special experience. I'm sorry, Megan. Now everyone knows you're a dork, and your steely facade of coolness has been shattered. But it is pretty exciting, and we get to be dorks together, like when we saw The Force Awakens, and again for The Last Jedi. Yes, we wore the exact same thing both times, and we will do it again this December when the next movie comes out. Now, we loved The Force Awakens, which introduced us to a new hero, Rey, a resilient young woman who grew up alone on a desert planet, and our villain, Kylo Ren. He is the child of Han Solo and Leia, who turned to the dark side and donned the mask like his grandfather, Darth Vader. It also just so happens to be that the day we saw The Force Awakens was the day I first told Megan that I love her. They weren't related, but it was a good day. It was a good day. Force Awakens and love. But then after we saw The Last Jedi, it captured our attention like nothing else. Since December of 2017, when it came out, Megan and I have not stopped talking about it. And it has made many of our 3-hour drives to visit her family fly by as we talked about nothing other than The Last Jedi. We've talked about its themes, the characters, how they grew and changed, how they were challenged in the movie. We've talked about what we hope to see happen in the next movie as a result of The Last Jedi. We have probed this movie and we have dug down into its depths. And that's the thing about great stories. Great stories capture our attention. They fill our imagination. We tell stories because they speak truth. Even if they're not literally true, they can reveal something to us, something more about ourselves or about the storyteller. They tell us about our world. They connect us to others and they expand our personal bubbles beyond ourselves. Good stories can take us on an adventure or help us to escape. They can be freeing and empowering. We find great stories in books, in movies, TV shows, anywhere and anything. We share stories with our friends, and twice a year we give out prizes for telling good stories at Storytime. But we also find great stories in the Bible. You may not have yet experienced that for yourselves, but I promise you that the Bible contains some of our greatest stories. And the Bible is full of stories we're telling because they are true. They are true because they happened. and because it's important to know history, and in this case, it's the history of our faith. And they're true because they tell us the truth about God, who God is, who God says we are. And they connect us to deeper truths that resonate across time and space, and these stories repeat across Scripture, across history, and across culture. God's fingerprints are all over the stories we tell. And so we don't always recognize when a new story is in fact a very old story, just repeating. Because we can tell and hear good stories over and over again in different forms, with different settings and different names, but the same basic story. For example, whose story am I telling? Long ago, in a distant land, there was a boy. He was descended from chosen people with a long, long legacy. And even among this important family, he was special, and his family had high hopes for him. But one day, he was betrayed. All of that hope, all of that potential was taken from him, and he was exiled and separated from his family. He ended up in a distant land, serving a new master. But despite his hardships and his setbacks, he rose to a powerful position nearly unmatched in all the land. One day soon, he would have the opportunity with all of his power to confront those who betrayed him. We'll have to pause our story here. Now, for those of you who are Star Wars dorks like me, you may recognize the background of Kylo Ren. Others of you, maybe you don't really recognize that story at all. But some of you may recognize Joseph's story from Genesis. And the truth is, that is the story of both Kylo Ren and Joseph. Now, I don't think anyone making The Last Jedi meant to repeat the story of Joseph from Genesis. Yet here we are, and we find the same story of two boys with great legacies and great potential who face great tragedy. It is the same story with, as we will see, two very different endings. So we're going to look at one of the great stories of the Bible, Joseph in Genesis. And we're going to look at one of the great stories of culture, of Star Wars, and specifically the character of Kylo Ren. And from this, we can learn more about the stories of our lives. We can learn about how the stories we tell ourselves shape us. And we can learn about how telling a better story to ourselves and others can change everything. Now, Kylo Ren and Joseph's stories, they don't start with their birth. If we're going to really look at their stories, we have to look at the families and relationships that shape them, their origin stories, so to speak. Because there are so many Star Wars movies that span generations, we actually know quite a lot about Kylo Ren's story. So we're able to make a genogram, a way to draw out a family tree in a way that looks at patterns among family members and relationships over 3 to 4 generations. So Kylo Ren's, well, his starts with Kylo Ren and his parents, Leia and Han Solo. Now, Han Solo grew up almost completely alone. In fact, Solo, the name that Kylo inherited when he was born, Ben Solo, was given to Han because he was on his own. So Han is used to being alone. And when faced with adversity, his instinct is to leave and look out for himself. Leia grew up as royalty on her planet and is a natural leader with a commanding personality. Tragically, her home planet was destroyed by the villainous Darth Vader, who she didn't learn till later was her birth father. So you could say the relationship had some issues. Now, Darth Vader was originally Anakin Skywalker, who was believed to be the chosen one, a great Jedi who prophecy said would bring peace and balance to the galaxy. But in his desire for power, he succumbed to the evil dark side. He became Darth Vader, the biggest, baddest bad guy to ever movie. Kylo Ren has a complicated relationship with his grandfather. And his relationship with his uncle Luke Skywalker, also pretty complicated. Luke is Leia's twin brother, but they grew up apart. Luke was a great hero who defeated the evil empire and brought his father back to the virtuous light side. He is expected to bring the Jedi back as peacekeepers and liberators throughout the galaxy. But not to be outdone, Han and Leia are just as big of heroes in the war between the Empire and Rebellion. So Kylo Ren, we see, is a child of legacy. His grandfather was one of the most powerful Jedi and fearsome villains to ever live. His parents are great heroes, and his uncle is a legend. His family is full of stories of great personal accomplishment and bold ambitions. Those ambitions have led them to struggle with power. The promise of power that he could use to save his wife led Anakin to the dark side. Luke sought to be a great hero, but also feared that he would follow in his father's footsteps. He came close, but ultimately he resisted the dark side. In the time between the original trilogy and the new one, we find out that he had great ambitions to train up a new generation of heroes, as only the legendary Luke Skywalker could. And he started with his nephew, Ben Solo. Ultimately, Luke and Kylo Ren fail to live up to that, and they run away, as do Han and Leia. Their family is broken apart and estranged from one another. Now we also know a lot about Joseph. Genesis 12 through 50 tells us the story of his family as God established them as God's chosen people and the forefathers of Israel. The great Abraham is his great-grandfather. Isaac is his grandfather, and his father is Jacob. His legacy is far greater than Kylo Ren's. Kylo Ren is from a family of heroes and legends. Joseph is from a family that was chosen especially by God. But you wouldn't know that without looking at that. At this time in the story, Joseph is one of Jacob's 11 sons, born to 4 different mothers. Now this is a great example of why something maybe in the Bible, maybe something that characters that we consider heroes of the faith do, but that doesn't mean it was good. It doesn't mean they should have done it. Like polygamy. Now there's so much tension between Jacob's wives and his children because of this complicated blended family. And this isn't the first sign of dysfunction in Joseph's family. Now they may be God's chosen people, but there's been dysfunction going all the way back to Abraham. There are patterns of dishonesty, favoritism, and severe brotherly rivalry that is embedded in their family culture and relationships. And Jacob takes these generational patterns to a new level with his family. And we're told how Jacob, whose parents each had favorites between him and his brother, plays even more extreme favoritism. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful rose. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. Jacob's favoritism divides his sons and turns them against Joseph, who buys into his father's opinion of him and becomes quite arrogant amongst his brothers. Joseph shares about his dreams with them, which they interpret to mean that they will all bow down to him as he reigns over them. Even his father and mother will bow down to Joseph according to the dreams that he shares with his family. These dreams fuel the family conflict, and soon the hatred of Joseph's brothers and their bitterness over their father's favoritism grows to the point that they consider killing Joseph. But instead, they only fake his death at the hands of animals and sell him into slavery. And then they lie to their father about Joseph's fate, and they hope that they'll never see their brother again. Favoritism, deception, brother against brother, and now Joseph is exiled to a faraway land and completely separated from his family. So 2 stories that aren't so different so far. Now, once they're on their own, we begin to see how Kylo Ren and Joseph's personal narratives take hold. How do they tell the stories of their lives? Kylo Ren, estranged from his parents and uncle, has now turned to the dark side and he joined the First Order, where he serves a new master, Supreme Leader Snoke. Good-looking dude. Good-looking. Now, Snoke tries to stoke Kylo Ren's anger and his personal darkness, as Kylo Ren tries to become his grandfather, emulating him by wearing a mask and dressing like Darth Vader. Now, he's even led to kill his own father, Han Solo, hoping that act will complete his transition to the dark side and free him from the burden of his family. But it does not. Now, as Kylo Ren stands before his master, we start to see Kylo Ren's personal narrative and how it affects him develop in this scene.
The mighty Kylo Ren. When I found you, I saw what all masters live to see. Raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special. The potential of your bloodline. A new Vader. Now, I fear I was mistaken.
I've given everything I have to you. To the dark side.
Take that ridiculous thing off. Yes. There it is. You have too much of your father's heart in you, young Solo.
I killed Han Solo. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate.
And look at you. The deed split your spirit to the bone. You were unbalanced, bested by a girl who had never held a lightsaber. You failed! Skywalker lives. The seed of the Jedi Order lives. As long as it does, hope lives in the galaxy. I thought you would be the one to snuff it out. Alas, you're no Vader. You're just a child. In a mask.
Just a child in a mask. Kylo Ren is struggling with his own legacy. Snoke saw in him great potential and power that he inherited from his family, that he's also trying to and struggling to separate himself from. We start to understand that his biggest nemesis is his own legacy. Killing his father was supposed to complete his transformation into a new Vader, but it has not. He smashes his helmet as he sets out to prove himself again. And this isn't the first time that Kylo Ren felt rejected by his master. Throughout The Last Jedi, we get glimpses into Kylo Ren through conversations he has with Rey, even across the galaxy. This is possible because of their strong connection to the Force, the mystical energy that connects everything and keeps it in balance in the Star Wars universe. Somehow, the Force brings them together. And even though they are enemies, they grow to understand one another in a way that no one else can. They begin to open up to one another, and we learn a lot more about Kylo Ren through this scene.
Why did you hate your father? Give me an honest answer. You had a father who loved you. He gave a damn about you.
I didn't hate him.
Then why?
Why what? Why what? Say it.
Why did you kill him? I don't understand.
No. Your parents threw you away like garbage.
They didn't.
They did. But you can't stop needing them. It's your greatest weakness. Looking for them everywhere. In Han Solo. Now in Skywalker. Did he tell you what happened that night?
Yes.
No. He had sensed my power. As he senses yours. And he feared it.
Leia.
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
Now, there's a lot kind of going on in that short conversation. But one of the most important things is that we finally see what happened between Kylo Ren and Luke, at least as Kylo Ren sees it. Now, we see that scene of Luke betraying Kylo Ren a few different times, each a little different. First, we see it as Luke tells it, without his lightsaber drawn. Then we see it here as Kylo Ren saw it, with Luke ready to strike him down and murder him. Later, Luke admits the real truth. He saw the darkness in Kylo Ren, like the darkness that Luke once saw in his own father and feared it himself. And he drew his lightsaber out of fear and instinct, but he never was going to use it. Not that that mattered to Kylo Ren. He was betrayed, rejected by his own uncle and mentor. We also learn that Kylo Ren killed his father, at least what he tells himself, is because he hoped that it would free him from needing him, from needing anyone who has or could abandon and reject him. He feels shackled by his past, and he is trying to kill any reminders or ties to it, including his family. Let the past die. Kill it if you have to, he tells Rey. He wants to burn down all the ties to his past and his legacy because he cannot bear the weight. Adam Driver, the actor who plays Kylo Ren, offers us some additional insight into his character. If you really imagine the stakes of him, in his youth, having all these special powers, and having your parents kind of be absent during that process on their own agenda is equally as selfish. He's lost in the world that he was raised in, and feels that he was kind of abandoned by the people he's closest with. He's angry because of that, I think, and he's a huge grudge on his shoulders. Kylo Ren feels abandoned and rejected. He felt abandoned by his parents, who sent him away to be trained by Luke as a child. He felt rejected by Luke, who he thinks was jealous of the power that Luke sensed in his nephew. And now he feels rejected by his new master, Snoke, who calls him a failure. Kylo Ren's personal narrative is a story of overwhelming legacy, abandonment and rejection, and failure that drives him to prove himself. He is both tied to his family and trying to free himself from them. He is conflicted and lost. Now, Joseph could frame his story in a similar way. His brothers have sold him, and he arrives in Egypt as a slave. He lost his family, his home, culture, language, freedom, and future, all in one day. He is alone, with every right to feel angry and abandoned not only by his family, but also by God. Yet Joseph knows that God is with him as he gains the trust of his master, Potiphar, through his hard work and God-given success. God is blessing Potiphar through Joseph, so Potiphar puts him in charge of everything and worries about nothing for himself. At least until the day that Joseph is sexually assaulted by Potiphar's wife, who wields her power over him and accuses Joseph of rape when he pulls away from her and flees, and she has him thrown into prison. At this point, Joseph could have given up and declared, "Life is unfair. I should never trust anyone, should never take risks or feel. I am a loser. My life is too painful, and it is a mistake." His life is not going the way it was meant to go. He had such grand dreams. What happened to them? This seems like a recipe for bitterness and brokenness. Joseph lost everything and is unjustly imprisoned. But for Joseph, this was actually the place where God forged his character and grew him into the man that he was going to become. And Joseph is not alone in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Joseph languishes in prison for years, yet we see that Joseph knows that God has not abandoned him. One day, Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker are thrown into prison, and they have troubling dreams. When they ask Joseph for help understanding their dreams, he acknowledges that it is God who will tell him what they mean, and then he interprets their dreams correctly. Joseph has been rejected and abandoned, betrayed, and struggled under the legacy of his family, just as Kylo Ren has. But that does not shape his story. Instead, he sits in prison with God, For Kylo Ren and Joseph, how they frame their personal stories affects how they fit into the bigger story, whether they find their place in it or they struggle against it. Earlier, we saw Kylo Ren tell Rey to let the past die. Kill her, if you have to. Kylo Ren is lost. He cannot grapple with his legacy. He's felt rejected by mentors on either side, and now he's trying to connect to Rey, our hero. So Rey comes to him, hoping to redeem him. They come together in Snoke's throne room, where Kylo Ren strikes down Snoke in an amazing turn of events, and together they fight for their lives against Snoke's elite guard. It is one of the greatest scenes that I have ever seen in Star Wars. After the fight, Rey thinks that Kylo Ren has turned back to the light side.
Ben?
It's time to let old things die. Snoke, Skywalker, the Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, let it all die. Rey, I want you to join me. We can rule together and bring a new order to the galaxy.
Don't do this, Ben. Please don't go this way.
Join me.
With Snoke dead, Kylo Ren leaves the First Order. So he reaches out to Rey and asks her to join him. Please. He begs her. He tells her that it's time to let old things die. Let it all die. What Kylo Ren cannot see, but we can as the audience, is that he is part of a grand meta-narrative that spans 10 movies, TV shows, books, and video games. Not only is he a part of his own narrative, but he's a part of something much bigger than himself. This grand narrative of light versus dark and good versus evil that repeats as Jedi versus Sith, rebellion versus Empire, resistance versus First Order. He wants to let it all end. He thinks that he can choose to let this story that he is a part of die out. That he is bigger. He is a part of something bigger than himself. Now, just so you know, Rey does not join him. And just like before with Snoke, Luke, and his parents, Kylo Ren feels rejected. Lindsay McCumber, a professor of religion and pop culture, writes about Kylo Ren that he seeks attachment from both heroes and villains, looking desperately for someone to connect himself to. When these attempts fail, he is left alone, but with the power of the First Order behind him. Kylo Ren comes to a point where he has tremendous power, but no connections to anything real. And that is a dangerous combination. Joseph, on the other hand, finds his story placed within the bigger story. Now, a few years after he interprets the dreams of the royal baker and cupbearer, Joseph is summoned from jail when Pharaoh himself has troubling dreams. None of Pharaoh's wise men could tell him what these dreams meant, so the cupbearer told Pharaoh about Joseph's amazing power, and they immediately summoned Joseph from prison. But when they asked Joseph to interpret the dreams, Joseph knows where the power really comes from. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams and tells him a great famine is coming and advises him to prepare for it with wise discipline over the next several years of plenty that will precede the famine. Genesis tells us that Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. You will only be in charge of my court. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Joseph rises up from prison to having authority over all of Egypt, the superpower of his time. He is second only to Pharaoh. He has power like Kylo Ren, but Joseph also has purpose. And we soon see the importance of that greater purpose as Kylo Ren and Joseph get an opportunity to confront the people who have betrayed them. with quite a lot of power behind each of them. And we see the different ways that they're shaped by their narrative. First, how will Kylo Ren return to Luke? After the scene in Snoke's throne room, Kylo Ren goes after the Resistance, which has been decimated over the course of The Last Jedi. Now all that is left of it is holed up in an old base. They are desperate, they are alone, and they're pinned down by the might of the First Order. Their end is imminent, till all of a sudden, Luke Skywalker emerges and walks out to face the whole First Order with nothing but a lightsaber and the Force.
I want every gun we have to fire on that man. Do it.
That's enough. That's enough!
Bring me down to him.
Did you come back to say you forgive me? To save my soul?
No.
I failed you, Ben. I'm sorry. I'm sure you are.
I'll destroy her, and you, and all of it.
No. Strike me down in anger and I'll always be with you. Just like your father. See you around, kid.
Luke Skywalker tricks Kylo Ren. He was never really there, but Kylo Ren is so consumed by his feelings of betrayal and abandonment that he never even notices. And he should have noticed. If you have seen the movie, maybe you were confused about why the salt that covers the planet and has been used very dramatically in contrast with the red soil in many earlier shots never moves under Luke's feet. Or maybe you thought the movie made a dumb mistake when, because that blue lightsaber that Luke is wielding was dramatically broken earlier by Kylo Ren and Rey. In hindsight, it was obvious that Luke wasn't really there. But Kylo Ren is so busy trying to kill his past that he cannot see what is right in front of him. And as he learns that we can't just burn down our past, our hurts and pains, we see that Kylo Ren is so easily controlled by his past. Snoke uses it to manipulate him. Luke uses it to distract him and give the Resistance the chance they need to escape. Luke warns Kylo Ren that strike me down in anger and I will always be with you. just like your father. And we see the truth of that. No matter how much power Kylo Ren has, he cannot kill his past. He cannot burn it down. The harder he tries, the more he is chained to it, and the less free he is. Now, how does Joseph respond to his brothers? The famine that Pharaoh's dreams foretold reaches Joseph's long-lost family as well, and they are without food. They heard that Egypt has food, but little did they know that Joseph was the one in control of the resources. This scenario sets up one of the most incredible scenes in the Bible. The brothers appear before Joseph, seeking food, but not knowing who he is. And after some back and forth where Joseph discovers that his father is still alive and believes Joseph to be dead, and also that he has a younger brother named Benjamin, Joseph finally reveals himself in chapter 45. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. Joseph embraces his brothers in forgiveness. He reconciles with them, and he moves his whole family, all his brothers, and all their wives and children, all their servants and herds down to Egypt, where they can be taken care of and provided for. He saves the brothers who once sold him into slavery, and he sets the stage for the next chapter in God's story of redemption and blessing through Joseph and his family. It is amazing to see how once he was placed in a position of leadership, Joseph isn't a passive member of the community, but rather he becomes deeply engaged on behalf of the public good. He rejects violence and revenge, and he brings closure to the snowballing effects of his family's dysfunction. Although he himself is the product of his family, Joseph does not choose retribution, no matter how justifiable. Joseph, who has ample reason to retaliate, instead chooses reconciliation. And it is a beautiful picture. Now, Kylo Ren and Joseph start out with a lot in common. Practically speaking, their backgrounds are very similar. But how they choose to frame their story completely changes how they move forward. So what did Joseph do differently? Well, first, Joseph rewrote his script. Kylo Ren and Joseph show us how we all inherit a script from our families. Kylo Ren and Joseph both inherited a sense of grandeur and self-importance. They were the golden child. They were descended from the chosen one, the person specially picked to change the world. And when they faced adversity, it would have been natural to turn to their family scripts. That's what Kylo Ren does. He turns to anyone who can offer him guidance, like his grandfather did when he turned to the dark side. He flees the people he depends on, same as Han and Luke did. But Joseph does not return to his family patterns of deceit and selfishness. Instead, Joseph forgives his brothers. He saves them and their families. And he follows God's path instead of his family's patterns. And we also inherit family scripts, patterns of behavior, and emotional responses that we may not realize are there until they come out. Then we are left wondering, why did I do that? Why did I respond like that? That's what my dad does. Or that's how my mom and her mom always act around each other. But your families do not have to determine your future. I encourage you to examine your script, reflect on your past, and choose to rewrite your script with God's help. A practical step that you may take is to use a genealogy to map out your family. Lay out the history and dynamics of your family relationships and their impact on you. I practiced this earlier with Joseph and Kylo Ren, but you can try doing it with your family too. Draw out a family tree and go back a few generations. Use markings to know relationships, addictions, values, and habits. Where do you see healthy, good relationships or broken and painful relationships? Where are there destructive habits? What patterns do you see repeat or what values are passed down? Perhaps your family has a pattern of disconnected siblings, or cutting off children, divorce, or addiction. Maybe your family struggles to handle conflict well, or express their needs and desires clearly. It could be that your family doesn't handle emotions well, or maybe it's their money they mismanage. And even if our families are joyful and wonderful, they're not perfect. And we are all shaped and molded by our families in subtle but significant ways. If we don't understand our family scripts, we will be stuck repeating the same patterns, good and bad. But if we take the time to understand our family scripts and rewrite our own, we can keep the good values and healthy habits gratitude, and begin to work and learn to improve and grow in that. And pray to God and walk with God through this process. The purpose of a junior grad isn't to make you feel bad about your family, but to help you recognize the family patterns and the scripts that shape you. The second thing that Joseph does that Kylo Ren did not was he confronted his shadow. Peter Scazzaro, a pastor of the ministry focused on emotionally healthy spirituality, described our shadows like this. Your shadow is the accumulation of untamed emotions, less than pure motives, and thoughts that, while largely unconscious, strongly influence and shape your behaviors. It is the damaged but mostly hidden version of who you are. And Kylo Ren does not confront his shadow. He is full of pain from his narrative of abandonment and rejection, but instead of confronting his shadow by admitting his emotions, his losses, and his wounds, he lets his shadow control him and tries to burn down everything around him. As Luke tells Kylo, strike me down in anger and I will always be with you. Luke is right. That is the consequence for Kylo Ren to wipe out any of his past rather than really confront and reconcile with his hurt and pain. It won't go away. He wants to just kill it by killing the reminders of his father, his uncle, his master Snoke. That will only haunt him and stay with him. Joseph, on the other hand, is in a position to bring justice to his brothers who betrayed him, insult him, but instead he forgives them. Joseph has honestly admitted and experienced his sadness, his loss, and his emotion. Genesis tells us that he wept repeatedly when he was reunited with his brothers. Again, 45:2 tells us that he wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him. And word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. Joseph is not driven by motivation of revenge, and he is not afraid of the one person more powerful than him hearing about his weeping. Joseph openly expresses his emotions. He does not minimize nor rationalize the painful years he experienced, but he honestly grieves them. And because of this, he is able to truly forgive and to bless his brothers. He became a leader of his family, and he cared for them for the rest of his life. Earlier in Genesis 41, we discover that he names his first son Manasseh, which comes from the Hebrew word for forget, and his second son Ephraim from the Hebrew word for fruitful. Because in spite of the pain of his past, God has enabled him to forget and to move forward into a fruitful future. The only way to not be controlled by emotions is to allow ourselves to feel and to experience them as Joseph did. We cannot ignore our shadows. The parts of our past are untamed, unacknowledged emotions that influence us now in ways that we do not realize. I challenge each of you to confront your shadow. Start to name your emotions. It helps to know what exactly you are feeling and describe it, rather than to suppress it and deny it. Try using a journal or a phone app like Pacifica, which you can use to track your emotions. Every day, or when you're experiencing a moment of turmoil or confusion, pause and prayerfully ask, what am I feeling? And what am I feeling about that feeling? What am I sad about, happy about, angry about, anxious about? Name your emotions and allow yourself to experience your feelings. And you may need more help, which is absolutely okay. In which case, consider going to speak to a counselor. Emotions are difficult and we all need help sometimes. Don't be afraid for that help to come from someone who is trained to help you. I know many people here who would speak openly and without shame about their experience with a counselor. And the third thing Joseph did was he joined the bigger story. Kylo Ren is trapped in his own narrative. If you watch The Last Jedi, the whole scene around his final confrontation shows how narrow Kylo Ren's focus is. Not only does he command every gun in his army to fire upon Luke, he sends all of his airships after the Millennium Falcon, his father's old ship, as soon as Rey flies into battle with it. These aren't sound strategies by any means. His personal narrative and his anger towards Luke and Han Solo controls him, keeps him from focusing on the bigger picture. And Joseph, on the other hand, he joins with God in something bigger than himself. When he was young, Joseph bought into the narrative that his father set for him. He was special among his brothers, and they would bow down to him because of his greatness, as would his father and his mother. And now he sees himself as a part of the greater story of God's redemption of humanity. We see how he tells his own story through the lens of God's purpose in Genesis 45. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine has ravaged the land for 2 years, and will last for 5 more years. And there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive, and to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. And he's the one who made me an advisor to Pharaoh, the manager of his entire palace, and the governor of all Egypt. Joseph sees his story as part of God's bigger story for his family, and beyond that, all people. Joseph frames all of his hardships, his setbacks, and painful experiences as part of God's purpose to save his family. Joseph understands that God uses all of our past for God's future when we surrender to God. He joins God's story, and because of that, his is far greater. His story could have ended in prison, bitter and alone, blaming God and others for all that has happened to him. Instead, Joseph chooses to walk with God, and his story becomes a part of an even greater story. And God's story is told across the pages of Scripture. It is the story of death and brokenness, failure and shame. It is the story of God pursuing creation relentlessly, never giving up every time we fail. God pursues us with love, and pursues us with love, and pursues us with love. It is the story of redemption, where Jesus, the chosen one, born of a long legacy of God's chosen people who fail time and time again, did what we could not. He lived a perfect life of perfect love. He took our sins on the cross, died, and rose again. Just as Joseph forgave those who hurt him, we hurt God for our selfishness and sin, yet we are forgiven. That is the story far greater than what we can tell. Far greater than any movie we can make. Joseph chose to be a part of this story. Now we read about him along with Moses, Joshua, Ruth, Esther, and many others who chose to be a part of that story. There's a quote from Joseph Campbell, whose work on myth and stories set the foundation for Star Wars and many of our modern stories. We must be willing to get rid of the life we've planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. We can tell our own story. We can be like Kylo Ren and hold on to our scripts, avoid our shadows, and keep our own small stories to ourselves. Or we can let go of those stories and join the story that is waiting for us. Star Wars tells a story that has spanned for generations. It has persisted for over 40 years, and we continue to go to the movies, hear their stories, join the characters on their journeys. But one day, the story will end. One day, no one will care about Star Wars anymore. The story will stop being told. And the Bible tells a story that has lasted many millennia telling it. And this one will stop till the end of time. And we're invited to be a part of it.